the first people to crack, the first people to begin to waver with these discussions about judicial reform were religious Zionists. The first people to start saying, no, we have to be, no, it's going to cause a split in the nation, and we can't have that, and we have to be more responsible, so we have to achieve some kind of compromise with the other side. The other side never said anything about compromise. In fact, to this day, they haven't said anything about compromise. And there's no room for compromise, because the situation is so disastrous that compromise basically means that nothing changes. And in fact, what this president, the current president, just suggested a few days ago, what he claims he suggested as some kind of a compromise solution, is in fact would only make things worse.
You're talking about the Israeli president, the Herzog
Yes,
guy?
yes.
So then,
Well, I can't understand what.
Bennett said he supported his proposal.
Oh, okay, fine. Well, I didn't even recall that Bennett said that. Who actually cares what Bennett says? But all right, you said that Bennett said that he supports it. All right, okay, fine. So one hopes that Bennett is washed up politically. We don't hear from him very much again. One hopes. But the people who wavered first, whose knees began to buckle, and who began to say that no, we can't have this. This was people like Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun, Rabbi Yaakov Medan. They're all from the same ilk, the Yeshivat Har Etzion, Gush Etzion, Alon Shvut. That's exactly. The Rabbi Amital came from there. He set up the party called, what do they call themselves? Metzad, or something.
Not around anymore, are they?
No, not around anymore at all. Years way back in the Oslo years, he set up this this more liberal religious Zionist party, which joined forces with Rabin and Peres to bring us the wonderful achievement that's known as the Oslo Accords. What was that party called? You'll remind me in a moment. It's always those people, because they're the masters. They say that they don't accept this suggestion. They don't like this idea. They won't go for it. They won't accept it, and that's it. So what can you do? So you have to give in. You have to buckle under and.
Meimad.
Meimad. That's right. It was called Meimad. The Meimad Party. Correct. So Rav Avital became very palsy with Shimon Peres and what have you, and the rest is history. So these people, the problem, the DNA of true religious Zionism, which is still the dominant mutation of DNA, shall we say, in the religious Zionist world. To a large extent, anyway. It's not. Well, it's not. I wouldn't actually. Maybe it's not dominant, but it's significant. It exists, and these people are well connected. So if they will say the right thing, they'll be funded by Ehud Barak. Is getting literally hundreds of millions of shekel at least. What's been going on in Israel for the last 11 weeks? Some people have made a calculation. We're talking about at the very least 100 million shekel has been spent on these activities, okay? At least. If in Friday, every newspaper was plastered with full page, 2-3 pages of ads and what have you. All these activities cost money. Huge amounts of money.
The people with money want power.
So if Rabbi so-and-so with a kippah and a nice beard will say what they'd like to hear, they'll support him and they'll help him print up his opinion on the matter in a nice little pamphlet, which will be added to the Machon Shilo newspaper, so it gets into many religious Zionist homes, and they'll read it on Shabbat, and they'll say, Rav so-and-so says that we need to make a compromise, so I guess that's what we need to do. That's how it works, in case you don't know. That's how the world works. That's how these people work. They're slaves. They're ideologically, psychologically slaves. They cannot think for themselves. They will always acquiesce to whatever their masters want. That's the truth of the matter. It's an ugly truth, but it's true. That's the fact. And many of them probably don't even realize that they're slaves.
Slave mentality.
But they have this slave mentality, exactly, and they do not know how to free themselves of it. And this is what has to change. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that time, nevertheless, has an effect on such sociological, historical processes. So there is today, on the one hand, you still have many of these, dyed-in-the-wool classic religious Zionists who are entirely, have this slave mentality. But you also have a fair number of people who, they would generally describe themselves as religious Zionists or Dati Leumi or something like that, but the truth is they no longer feel that way towards the left. Unless you really scare them into saying that if we don't agree to compromise, which means to fold completely, because there's no such thing as a compromise in these people, then the country will fall apart. If you can scare them into believing that, then they may go for it as well. but really they don't feel that way in essence. They don't really view these people as their masters, and they really actually would like to be rid of them. So if you were to ask me, so what's going to be? What's going to happen? I would tell you, first of all, I don't know. But I would not be surprised if the right wing, in part due to these classic religious Zionist types and their calls for appeasement, I would not be surprised if they fold and the left wing wins this round. I would not be surprised. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I would not be surprised. Because we see that, and for anyone who doubted there is such a reality, there most certainly is the deep state of Israel. Israel has a deep state like the US has a deep state. You see it very plainly when 37 out of 40 pilots in the most elite squadron of fighter pilots, the ones who are going to be told to attack Iran in the not too distant future, apparently, when 37 out of 40 sign a document saying that we don't feel like showing up for our weekly day of what's the word, training, of keeping ourselves at top combat readiness. Well, then you understand, and just so happens that all these people are from the same social background. They all grew up in the same neighborhoods. They all went to the same schools. When you see that this reality plays itself out again and again and again, you see this in the Praklitut, in other words, the judicial system, etc., etc. When Aharon Barak, His Holiness Aharon Barak, points out in an interview that he gave a few weeks ago, which I did hear, I listened to it very carefully, every word. He said that it's unfortunate that we didn't have more Sephardi judges in the Supreme Court, but we just couldn't find the right kind of person. They just couldn't find them. We really tried, but couldn't find them. It's really unfortunate. Which is interesting because Professor Ruth Gabison, who passed away some years ago, who was definitely not Sephardi, as the name implies, and she was also the winner of the Israeli Prize for Jurisprudence or something many years ago. So she knew something about law, and she was a professor and what have you, but she was opposed to Aharon Barak's desire to turn the Supreme Court into the sole meaningful institution of this country that would decide everything. And she said so. Interestingly enough, she wasn't able to get herself elected to the Supreme Court because Aharon Barak didn't want her to be. Because it's the deep state. The deep state imbues all corridors of power. What happened just recently with the police force? We have a minister of Bitachon Leumi, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He would like to do many things. For example, he gave instructions that demonstrators in Tel Aviv should not be allowed to block the roads, the highways. Okay. Which is against the law. It's reasonable for the person in charge of the police to tell them you police people, you make sure that they don't do this. But the commander of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, Ami Eshed, he happens to belong to the other side. He belongs to the deep state. He's Ashkenazi, and he's left-wing, and what have you. So, interestingly enough, by coincidence no doubt, the policemen just didn't do anything. They just didn't prevent it. They allowed it to happen. I remember when, 30 years ago, right-wing people tried to block streets and roads because of the Oslo Accords. I remember how they were beaten and how they were treated.
They did right here. They did right here a couple of years ago. I seen it with my own eyes. They had the road blocked right there at Stringbridge, and the cops just ran, and I mean they was just clocking people, whoever they could get, spraying them, clocking them. Whack,
yes,
whack.
but it didn't happen to the left-wing protesters in Tel Aviv. Now, when Yair Lapid was asked this question by a reporter recently, how do you explain this difference in police response to the blocking of a road? His response, believe it or not, he said, well, it's very simple. He says, Avu al beshanim. It was, many years have passed since then. V'medubbar b'anashim acherim. It's different kind of people, obviously, because they are left-wing, white, Ashkenazi, and these are right-wing. Some of them are not so white, and a lot of them are dati. So obviously, different kind of people. So different two systems of law. If you block the street and you belong to that camp, then that's what you get patted on the back. The police, in fact, help you block the road. They bring their police cars. They block the highway for you, and then tell you go. That's what they did. This is what's been going on for the last several weeks. And so go ahead, protest. We're on your side. It didn't work that way 30 years ago at the time of Oslo, or the time of when Sharon decided to destroy Gush Katif, for example, which was also, as we see, a very successful policy. It brought a tremendous amount of peace and quiet, as we all see. That's the reality. We have to understand where we are. There's no room left for anybody except for the most stubborn, obstinate, and truly blind Dati Lumi types, such as people in Machon Shilo or something like that. There's no room for any intelligent person to try and tell themselves any other narrative. That is the reality. So the first thing that has to happen is for more and more Dati Lumi people who are, on average, a very high quality type of person. They have to just get out of this mindset that we're the servants, we're the slaves, they're the masters, and when we always have to give in because who knows what will happen if we don't. There will be a civil war, etc., etc. The interesting thing to note is, please take this back. Thank you. The interesting thing to note is that this reminds us of what we find in Sefer Melachim.
Do you think that the...
Just 1 second. You must be familiar with this story, I'm sure. We're talking about Shlomo HaMelech, a very wise man, we're told. Psukim relate to us his wisdom. This is in Melachim Aleph, Perek Gimel, chapter 3, Pasuk Tet Zayin, 16. Az tavona shetayim noshim zonot el HaMelech. At that time, 2 women of the night, shall we say, came to the king, وَتَعَمُضْ لَلَفَنَوْ, and they stood before him. وَتَوْمَرْ هَإِشَّا هَأَحَث, one of them said, Bi Adoni, O king, O master, Ani وَهَإِشَّا هَزَوْ, we live together, Yoshevot b'bayit echad, we live in the same house, وَأَلَدْ عِمَّهْ b'bayit, and we both gave birth to a child. We're talking about what today are euphemistically referred to as single mothers. Well, these were working women, single mothers. And they both had a child because the pill hadn't yet been invented. And so that's what happens. So, on the 3rd day after I gave birth, and on the 3rd day she also gave birth, and we were in the house together, no one else was there. Just the 2 of us. Now her son died in the middle of the night, one night, because she slept, she crushed him, she was rolled on top of him in the bed, and he suffocated, and he died. Watakom b'toch halayla, she surreptitiously at night, Watikach et beni me'esli, she took my son, who was fine, Va'amathecha yishena, and I was asleep. Watishkavehu b'chika, and she took that boy and placed it in her arms, at her breast, with b'na hamet hishkiva v'chiki, and her dead son she placed next to me. Wa'akum ba'bokar lehenik et b'ni v'hine met, and I woke up in the morning to nurse my child, and I see that he's dead. Wa'ethbonen elo ba'boker v'hine lo haya v'ni asher yolavti, but then I looked at the child, this dead child, and I saw it wasn't my son, it was the other woman's son. Wa'tomer ha'isha ha'aheref lo chi b'ni ahai u'v'necha met. The other woman said, no, that's not true. The dead child was yours, and the live child is mine. And the other one says, no, not true. And my son is the one, the living child, and yours is the dead one. And thus they spoke before the king. This one says, this is the child is mine, the one that lives. And yours is the dead child. The other one says the opposite. So what are you going to do? Whom should you believe? Bring a sword. They brought a sword. He said, the king said, Gizru et hayaled ahai lishnayim. Cut the living child into two. Give one half to this woman, and one half to the other with hasi la'ahath, the other one. Everyone will be happy. Watomer ha'isha asher b'na ahai el hamelech, the mother of the living child, said, because we're talking about slicing her child into two, ki nichmeru rahamer al b'na, watomer bi'adoni, she said, no, tenula et yalud ahai, give her the son, the child, wa'ameth al temithuhu, and do not kill him. Wazot omeret, gam li, gam lach, lo yeh gezoru. And the other one, however, the one who was lying, said, no, cut him into two. Neither of us will have him. Vaya'an hamelech vayomer, the king at that moment said, Tanula et hayalud ahai, give this one, the child. Wahamet lo temithuhu, he imo, this is the mother. What we see with the radical left wing in this country, they are precisely like the mother of the dead child. They say, if you go ahead with your plans, which everyone knew that was the platform that was discussed, in fact, not just for months but for years. And by the way, very similar reforms were suggested by previous justice ministers years ago, except they happened to be from the right camp, from the right faction, so then it was okay to make such suggestions. People like Gidon Saar made such suggestions, and even Tzipi Livni. But they were not really, well, Tzipi Livni used to be a Likudnik until she became a leftist, and so was Gidon Saar actually. But once you join the true religion, then you're okay, so you can say anything you like. So the leftists are willing to threaten civil war. They're willing to threaten the security of this country by basically destabilizing and how shall I put it? Ensuring that this, for instance, this squadron will not be functional, will not be able to do what it's supposed to do. They're willing to, they threaten all this openly. They've been saying now for many weeks, for a couple of months, that if even if this present government passes these laws in the Knesset by a majority, and it's all democratic and legal, and then the High Court illegally disqualifies these laws, then the army and the police, etc., must follow the position of the court and not of the government, which stands in clear contradiction to what the explicit law states. All the law states explicitly that the police, the army, the security forces, they all are controlled by and have to follow the instructions they receive from the elected government, from the cabinet. So they are literally threatening civil war and dismantling the country and endangering the entire Zionist enterprise, which they claim is theirs, that they created, that they made, that they built up. They're willing to endanger all of that because they don't like these ideas, these suggestions. In other words, it's exactly the position of the one prostitute against the other. It's better that neither of us have a live baby, so let's cut him into two. Whatever, we don't care what happens. The main thing is that you won't get your way. That's precisely the situation we find ourselves in today, which tells you a great deal about who really belongs to this country and to this land. The people who can say such a thing don't really belong here. And they're not really connected to this country and to this land. They really are foreigners, and in many cases we'd be better off without them. And that's what will probably happen. So even if in the long run, I heard just the other day one of these high-tech giants say that he says if these things go through, I'm just going to pick up and emigrate and take all my company, all my millions with me, etc. By the way, he had a lot of money in the SVB bank, which I don't know exactly what the status of his account is at this moment, but that's for him to worry about, not for me to discuss right now. But these are the people. These are the threats that we have to hear from, which tells you everything you need to know about who these people are and how they view things. In other words, this country only has value from their perspective if they're in charge, and if things are done their way. If it's not, it's either my way or the highway. There's no other way. If the country has to fall apart as a result, if the Air Force won't be able to perform its task, if the government orders it, so be it. Who knows? Do they really intend to follow through with all their threats? It's hard to say, but they're certainly willing to threaten, and they're certainly willing to predictably cause all these people, particularly the religious Zionists, to cause their teeth to chatter and their knees to knock together and say, "Oh, we have to compromise. Well, we can't allow that to happen. So we'll let them get away with it." So that could be what happens in this round. But time is on our side. We're not going anywhere. And even if this round the right wing loses, and that will be, it's very difficult to know what will happen, because I think that could spell the end of Netanyahu's career. That could mean that the next election the Likud will get 12, 15 seats and not 32. Very easily, I can imagine that happening. First of all, a lot of the people who voted Likud this last election will do what they did the election before, which is they won't go to Dra, they'll go to the beach instead. They couldn't be bothered the time before, which is why we ended up with the Bennett-Lapid government, precisely for that reason. And it could be worse next time. But eventually, it's not a question so much of democracy, it's a question of demography. Demographically, time is on our side.
Mm-hmm.
So even if things don't work out the way they should work out now, eventually we shall win. And that's the ikar, to know that we must win. We have to understand that it is our duty, our job, and the job of those who will come after us, to wrest control away from the deep state of Israel, from all these secularists who hate us so much, and they do, because it's being reported in all the various media, WhatsApp messages that have been leaked and emails and what have you. For example, last night I heard that a former Supreme Court judge, the name of the judge was not given unfortunately, but it's based on leaked emails. No one's denying them, they can't be denied. One of these judges, apparently a woman judge, so that limits the number of people. You can probably guess it's one or two or three people. wrote that I regard Smotrich and Ben Gvir, I don't regard them as part of my family. This is what they wrote. לא חלק ממשפחתי, הם גם לא חלק מעמי, they're not part of my nation. I see them as enemies. אני רואה בהם אויבים. Am I surprised by that? Not in the least. I've been saying this to many people for perhaps decades. That's how they view us, as enemies. Not as brothers, not as the same people, we're not on the same side. And here they say it. It's all out in the open. What's good about what's happening right now is that everything is becoming more and more apparent. It's all out in the open now. They're not even trying to hide, not their hatred and not their refusal to accommodate the democratic process, what have you. It's all becoming. It used to be done behind the scenes. It used to be that they felt that they couldn't be so explicit and obvious about everything. But now they really have no more qualms. And that's a good thing, because that will help to convince more people on the right and religious people that we're in a war, basically. We're in a kind of war. And you cannot win a war, you cannot fight your enemy unless you really don't like them. Maybe even hate them. When the British went to war in the First World War against the Germans, England was plastered with posters of the Hun soldier with fangs and blood dripping from his hands, etc., showing them how he was stabbing children. Some of that was partly true, but the point is that you have to do that if you're going to mobilize hundreds of thousands of men and send them to the Somme to be machine gunned and caught on barbed wire. To motivate people to fight, they have to hate the other guy on the other side. You can't fight someone if you don't hate them. It doesn't work. If they view us as the enemy, and many of them do, then we have to do the same. Otherwise, it's a foregone conclusion that we've lost. There's no way you can win if you don't understand that this is a war. And we have to be smart. We have to play the game very intelligently and do what can be done. And then we may have to accept that we cannot win this round. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But if you do not understand that this is a fight for it's all or nothing, and we're in a tremendous battle between these two camps. If we don't truly perceive the other side to be what they are, then we have no chance. They are able to. They're successful, but precisely because they do perceive us in that way, and they say so, and they have no reservations about admitting this. But we know that Devar Elohenu yakum le'olam. Hashem's design will, in the end, win out.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.